Our next panel is entitled Artisan Mentors, Bookmaking 101. This will be moderated by Joe Rogers, Jr. Joe is the founder of Total Equity Now, 10, a grassroots, volunteer-driven organization facilitating education information sharing, community organizing, youth leadership development, and community-based policy research. Perhaps best known for its literacy across Harlem and now literacy across the South Bronx suite of initiatives, 10 mobilizes community members as reading activists and each year guides thousands of Harlemite donated books to families in local shelters. Rogers is also a senior researcher and public engagement specialist for the Campaign for Educational Equity at Teachers College, Columbia University. Joe's panelists will include Christopher Myers, Shadra Strickland, Raúl Colón, and Sara Varon, award-winning authors and artists. He will lead a discussion on using books as tools to overcome challenging situations.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Good morning, everyone. Right, ready to go. So it's so great to be here. I just first very briefly want to thank Kristen Freda, Jenny Brown, and Cynthia Wow for having me here. It's a real pleasure to participate in this particular conversation for a number of reasons. One is I just remember I grew up very poor in southern Maine, Maine and St. Louis, mostly southern Maine. And we didn't have a lot of books in our home. My family couldn't afford to buy books. But my mom made sure that we went to the public library, and I was that kid who, instead of watching TV or playing games at night, I had the little flashlight, or had my light on long after I was supposed to be asleep. And books were my life and allowed me to sort of escape some challenging situations and also develop my imagination. So it's really great to be here. I want to briefly introduce just a couple of sentences about each of our panelists here this morning. You probably know more about them than I do, and you can certainly look up more online, and they're going to tell you about themselves in a moment, at least through their books. So Chris Dean Myers started out doing some research to help his father. You may have heard of his father. Walter Dean Myers, the great. And he's a winner of many awards, including the Caldecott Coretta Scott King honor, for the book Harlem, on which he collaborated with his father, and more recently produced a book in collaboration with a mutual friend of ours, Sharifa Rhodes Spitz, called Jake Makes a World, which was commissioned by MoMA about the great Harlem artist Jacob Lawrence. To Chris's right, we have Shadra Strickland, who I met outside Bank Street here. She's a winner of the Ezra Jack Keats Award, the some award fans. Yeah, all right. The John Steptoe Award for New Talent, I think both in 2009 for her book Bird, which she created with local author, I think also Brooklynite, Zeta Elliott. And this is just a wonderful book as well. She also got the Maurice Sendak Fellowship for the award fans. Maurice Sendak Fellowship. Okay. Oh, it's you. Okay. My notes. I'm sorry. Next year, maybe. Next year for your next book. Okay, I'm getting ahead of. I'm predicting. I can see the future. See into the future. So thank you, Sara Varon, for correcting me. Sarah's a printmaker, graphic novelist, children's book author, and illustrator. Best known, perhaps, she got a Kirkus Award for The Odd Duck, her book in 2013, one of the best books of 2013. She's also written Bake Sale, and she is a Maurice Sendak Fellowship. Okay. Oh, I should mention, just going back quickly to Shadra, this is what I meant to share, is that she also wrote with local artists, A Place Where Hurricanes Happen, the story of 4 young people, 4 children before, during, and after Hurricane Katrina. So that's a very important book. And then finally, last but not least, we have Raúl Colón. And Raúl illustrated Angel and the Baby Jesus, a New York Times bestseller. He also illustrated the book that I had the pleasure of reading in preparation for this panel, which is, thank you very much. It's called Draw, quite simply. Beautiful, beautiful book. He also illustrated Jill Biden's Don't Forget, God Bless Our Troops, among other titles. So I want to start off with probably a question that is probably in the minds of just about everyone in this room. It's a burning question I've had ever since I knew that I was going to be here today. And I want each of you, if you would, just start off by commenting on what do you think Taylor Swift would think about your books? And how do you think that sort of propelled her career in music? Okay, that's not my first question. The first question is, as I was reading through, did I hold up everyone's book? I think I forgot to hold up one here. So, Chris, your other book, I think this is more recent, My Pen, and Sarah's book, wonderfully creative, Robot Dreams. Really enjoyed all of these. So the first real question is, I noticed that one way or another, each of these books encourages readers not just to write or draw or to make things for their own amusement, but also encourages them to use these actions as tools for processing, understanding, and overcoming difficult situations in one way or another. And you each do it in your own way. So one of them talks about relocating to a new town. One of them deals with the issue of loneliness. Another, the death of a loved one. And another, I think, a homework assignment. I'm trying to remember which one that is, but I wrote this about a month ago. And each protagonist or narrator uses his or her voice or artistry to imagine a new or different world. So if you could, these young people and robots and dogs featured in these books, they're actors, they're doers, right? They're making things. And if you could just comment on, was that your goal in writing these books at all? Did you want to inspire young people to use their imagination to do things and to create worlds? And if not, what did you hope to accomplish? And in any particular order?
All right.
Start with you. Okay. Great. Thank you.
I don't know. For me, especially with Bird, Set a Story was about this young boy using his art to overcome some of the issues in his life. But I think as artists, that's something that's close to all of us. It's how we process things when we were growing up and how we continue to process the world around us through the art, through drawing, through observation, through being inclusive and living inclusively, meeting different people, and all of that comes out in the art. So I think it's only natural that it shows up in the work, especially when we're telling these stories about young people who happen to be creative.
Thank you.
Sure.
Chris? Perhaps Sarah?
I feel as if one of the things that is true of all of the books that we're doing is that we're creating frameworks, and we're creating frameworks by which young people can process whatever the new thing that they're going to deal with in their life is. So, you can't anticipate all of the new things that are going to happen. You can't anticipate the amount and the levels of difference that any young person is going to encounter. You're not, no one is that good. That's, yesterday or maybe the day before was Back to the Future Day or something. And everyone was talking about, there was an impression of what the future was going to be like 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And we see how different that is. So you can't anticipate what the future is going to be for young people. But what you can do is provide for them a framework through which they can understand difference, through which they can understand the new. And books provide that kind of framework. Be it Raúl's book, in which, drawing is the lens through which that child can see things. Or Shadra's book, which, Bird, in which, there is a problem in the world, and the child just needs a framework, some kind of window or an outline through which to see that problem, to which to see his brother's tensions. I I don't know your work as well, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But that's what the books provide. They provide frameworks. And when you see books that don't provide a framework or provide a framework that assumes that there will be no difference, you have to understand that that book becomes less useful for children as a tool, because that's what we're doing. We're making tools for kids to take with them into their worlds. And that's the gift that a book can be, I find.
Yeah. In my case, and we all do this, I'm sure we visit schools, so I know what I'm asked when I'm at a school and what children think about. And most artists, I think, and writers, of all of us here, create for children. We didn't grow up. That's basically one of the things, because we still think like children. We know what it feels like. So we're the ones that know basically how a child feels in many instances. Like it was explained before by Adam, that children like a little of that sarcastic back and forth, and probably their parents don't. But we remember it, so that's why we can still do it. When I, for instance, produced this book, Draw, it was based on my experiences as a child. I used to draw a lot. I knew I liked it since forever. I can't remember when I started, but I do know I always drew like every child does. In school you go and every child draws. So I always ask the question, who likes to draw? They all like to draw. The other thing was that I was a very sick child, so I was locked in the house many days, couldn't go out. And I found out that a lot of my colleagues, a lot of them have gone through things like that, where they were sick when they were children or something happened that kept them inside, and they decided to let go of let their imagination fly and create. So that's why I did the book. It was about me and how I felt as a child, and I knew that other children would relate to that. And that's why I put it together. So every book I illustrate, I'm always thinking about how the child will feel when they read it or see it. In this case, this is a wordless book. The interesting about it is that the children, a lot of teachers use it, and librarians, by having the children tell the story, but that they see in the pictures, or write it. So they see the pictures, they write their own story based on it. So that's one of the reasons for it too. So yeah, I always think about how children can use it as a tool. And but then again, I don't follow any formulas. It's whatever comes out, whatever I feel.
That's good. We're going to talk about the process in a little bit. I know that there are a lot of folks in the room who will want to hear Sarah's response to this. There are a lot of probably canines and robots in the audience. We're interested in how you can use a book to overcome challenges that dogs and robots face. But this is really it's about helping. How can this help a young person sort of deal with different obstacles in their lives or challenging situations?
I usually draw animals, or sometimes I draw food characters, but I don't usually draw people, and I guess I think something that's nice about it is that anybody can relate to it. I mean, if it's not an old person, it's not a young person, it's just you, as the reader, I guess. And I actually, I don't know, I don't know.
Yeah. So I think in terms of, sometimes it's, the book can be for entertainment, to help people work through things, but simply put, was there sort of a goal when you, this is what came to mind, it's wonderfully imaginative, it deals with loneliness, and actually the dog in the book, creates a robot to be his or her friend. Was that part of the goal, was to help folks who are dealing with those kinds of issues, or was it more for sort of purely entertainment value?
I did it because my friend was putting together an anthology about robots, and I had never drawn robots, so I made this little story. It was just this, like, an 8-page story, and it was basically the first chapter, and I missed his deadline, but it went in another anthology, and I remember the person who put it together showed it to her husband, and she said, "Oh, this is really sad. You know, the robot's just lying on the beach." And he said, "Oh, Sarah's stories always have happy endings. That robot's gonna be fine." And so that made me really mad. So I thought, you know what? That robot is not gonna be fine. So,
Read the book. You'll find out what happens to the robot.
So then I decided, you know, I was kind of at the beginning of making stories, so I thought I'd do something different, and I'd make it about, to me, the story's about betrayal. I think the dog, you know, sort of accidentally betrays his friend, not meaning to, which is kind of...
There is no accidental betrayal.
Well, I mean, you can make a mistake and you can hurt your friend without meaning to. So I don't think that, the dog's not a bad person, so I think that, or a dog, I think that that's something that happens to everybody all the time. You know, it's hard that, you know, people are complicated. It's easy to accidentally hurt someone's feelings or make them feel bad. So anyway, that was, I guess, my intention. And then it follows the story. I guess that's...
No, that's good. I think that's the right answer. I would like to, I want to ask you a little bit about your process, but I think I want to jump to the next question, which is about literacy. And I was in a meeting the other day, Community Board 10's Education Committee. Community Board 10 represents Central Harlem, and they had brought in a superintendent of District 5 schools, Central Harlem schools. And she was reporting on the stats from the latest round of standardized tests, and I know standardized tests are not the be-all, end-all. Some people believe they tell us something important, some people don't think they tell us anything important. But the superintendent was lamenting the fact that, on average, schools in Central Harlem, in grades 3 through 8, around 15% of the young people in those grades are sort of reading at grade level. So even if you think there's a 30, 40, 50% margin of error, I think there's still sort of maybe a red flag there. And also by talking to some educators in Harlem, they also say when they get to middle school or high school, a lot of the young people are struggling to catch up to become proficient readers or great readers, which is what we want for all young people. So whether this was a goal or not of yours in creating these books, how do you think these books in communities, say, like Harlem or other communities in New York City or wherever, how can these books inspire more of our young people, especially elementary school students, middle school students, et cetera, to get excited about reading and maybe to see themselves? I know in some of these books, especially people of color, reflected in very thoughtful ways, as are the robots and dogs. So if you could speak to, how can these books help inspire our young people to love reading and to read more? And
Well,
yes, please.
yeah, I'm actually going to be here on 125th Street or maybe around there in the area in a couple of weeks with Joey Humans, who's has an organization called Behind the Book, and I will be visiting a school in Harlem, exactly. Central Harlem, and now we're going to do exactly that. We're going to talk about, not necessarily draw, there's other books that I've illustrated, but they're putting together their own book. That's what the program is, and they're writing their own story. So I will talk about how I illustrated and why I illustrated this particular book, Goodbye Havana, Hello Hola New York, about immigration, a little girl who immigrates from Cuba during the time Fidel Castro took over communism. And they are writing their story. I will talk about how the process I followed in putting the pictures together. So they learn how to put their own little story and pictures together. And we're going to sit down and have some activities where they're going to draw their own little, pick one picture, they're going to draw from their own story. So they're doing that right now, and I think the book that they chose is going to help them see how that's done. And I'm looking forward to that. Now, when I visit other schools, same thing happens. I am telling children about the process, especially like I mentioned with Draw. They've written some beautiful stories. I mean, I've read some of them. Some teacher, this was in New Jersey, Princeton, gave me these little books they made based on the story
It's a beautiful concept. I'm actually
Yeah.
working with it. We're going to do an event in Harlem at the end of the school year where the young people will show the books they've created this year.
Yeah, so that's the idea. So that's one of the ways I'm doing it. And I'm sure at home a lot of children just sit down and do what I did when I was a kid. They read a picture book, and some of them will be inspired to write their own. And I think teachers are encourage that in librarians.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it's important for all of us to see different versions of ourselves and possibility. And I think, as much as I would love to believe that children go home and read picture books after school, I don't think that that's true for a large majority of them. There's some kids who don't have books at home. It's not a priority from their families because they don't live in a house full of readers. In the same way that I didn't grow up in a house full of artists. My mom was a teacher, thank God for that. But she didn't know anything about art. She couldn't draw a straight line. And I went to college and took art classes, and I learned from old dead white guys like Norman Rockwell and Maxfield Parrish, amazing artists, but I never saw myself reflected back, and so it took me a little bit longer to realize that I wanted to become an illustrator or a storyteller. It wasn't until I became a teacher and was reading picture books to my students in class that I saw Chris Myers and Kadir Nelson and Pat Cummings and Tom Feelings and all these people that told the stories that resonated with me. And so I feel that, I don't know what I feel. I feel that it's important. And in terms of children being able to see different versions of themselves in books is what is going to inspire them to keep seeking those different types of stories. I also think that community service and doing school visits is so important for us. I'm bringing the Ezra Jack Keats bookmaking competition to Baltimore so that students can. Thank you. So excited. So excited. So that students can be in charge of their own stories and tell their own stories, and hopefully if they win, they will get some monetary reward and see that they can make a life, a career out of doing so. So it has many. The question has many different answers, and I think that we all contribute in different ways to help kind of solve that problem. If that makes sense.
I would say I think that there are many ways to tell a story, and words aren't always the only way, and I think some people are better maybe with pictures than with words, so hopefully it will help students who might have trouble with words to be able to understand a story that's like a pretty long and a full story. I mean, it's almost 200 pages, I think, and there's plenty of books that don't have words, but I think it will just help kids to know that they can tell stories too if they're not necessarily the best readers or the best writers.
For me, there's a few things I've been thinking about. To echo what I've been hearing, what my fellow panelists and y'all have been saying, I feel like writing as a pathway to reading is really important. This idea that we need to encourage children to write. And I think that is one of the most direct ways to get them reading. And so we've all been talking about the creating, entrusting children to create their own stories. I'm beginning recently also to question this idea of relatability and the relatability model that we've all been talking about and that we all sort of take for granted. This idea that somehow, and it's strange what I'm saying, because it's not like I'm saying that we should, I very much want to have more books with people of color, with interesting women characters, with any kind of demographic. Yes, that's true. But I don't think that the reasoning behind it is about relatability. I don't think that the books that I loved as a young person and the books that any of us loved were necessarily, they didn't reflect me so directly. So when I read Dinky Hawker Shoots Smack, or The 7.5 Sins of Stacey Kendall, that's a good example for me. There was no part of me that was piercing ears or a prepubescent girl as a child. But the idea is that I loved that book. The book was a book I cared for. And I think that what's interesting is when people are proficient readers, when there are young people who are super proficient readers, we don't think about the need for relatability in their books, in the books that we give them. And so I'm wondering if the issue is not about necessarily this reflection model again, this idea that we need to see ourselves in the books and therefore we'll read the books because the books are exactly like us. Because, you know, some of the most popular books we see, the Harry Potters and the, you know, there's nobody, I mean, I don't know anyone like that. Maybe you guys do.
Wizards.
Yeah, the wizard community, I'm sure, was very happy to see themselves reflected. But what I do think is kind of central and something that I do see in the work that I like is a formal diversity as well as a demographic diversity. And so when you see books that are combinations of, you know, graphic novel and young adult book, or the fact that the different modes of storytelling will open up to more kinds of readers. As you mentioned, that there's this idea of, you know, there's some people who read pictures better than words, and you need to open up that as a kind of diversity as well. I think that both hand in hand will invite more kinds of readers to the text. I think that that's one thing that you've seen in the industry over the past 20 years is a narrowing of kinds of books. So now when I pitch to my editors, often, you know, picture books have gotten much less wordy over the past 20 years. Middle grades have become cemented as a genre that means and so when you think of books that we've all loved as children, where would they exist as within the kind of marketing schema of the publishing industry now? Where would a Dauler's Greek myths book exist? Which, of course, I mean, I think I loved Greek myths when I was a child. You know, again, I don't know how relatable it was for me. I mean, I do throw a little lightning here now.
Would you say, Chris? Would you say that we need, you know, there's sort of the we need diverse books movement and the hashtag and all that. Is this a plug for a we don't need diverse books? Like, I'm just
absolutely not. But I think that we need to expand some of our views of what diversity means.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can tell you, I mean, also from my own, just very quickly, from my own personal experience, growing up in Maine, which is someone mentioned, it's right next to Vermont. One of the other panelists mentioned, and I think Maine is technically the whitest state in the country, statistically. And I remember growing up where it was less important, and I think it's probably different for a kid growing up in Harlem. It was less important when I was really young to see myself, people who looked like me reflected in the books. It was as I began to get older, as I started to grow up, and there was more opposition to black men and black boys and black teenagers, and it became that much more important. And you know, there are school librarians here like Elizabeth Naylor Gutierrez, there's Cheryl Wolf, folks. You know, there are a lot of lifelong librarians in here, and it was in high school that my high school librarian, she changed my life by introducing me to James Baldwin and the autobiography of Malcolm X and Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston and all these folks. So it became so much more, it was this progression of needing to be able to identify with the writers and characters like that. So I think you could probably create a whole conference on that alone. Yeah.
But what's interesting is that you were by that point already a fairly proficient reader.
Yeah.
And I think that while that moment is super powerful, I think for all of us, and we all have that moment of, that's the first time I read somebody that was like me. I think that one of the gaps that we're having is, one of the gaps that we're having is, how do we get young people to the point of being proficient readers ready to read an autobiography of Malcolm X.
Sure, yeah.
And that's something I've been kind of mulling over.
Yeah.
So
So,
is it an issue of accessibility? You know, so again, for parents that don't have books in the home and parents who aren't readers necessarily, you know, it's much easier to turn on the television and be seduced by whatever reality show is on. Or I had Deb Taylor and I were talking once, and she's like, you know, people will spend their last paycheck on Beyonce and Jay-Z tickets. Why won't they come to book festivals? I'm like, well, books aren't sexy. Nobody, you know, you have to work. You have to want that, you know. So how do you sort of, I don't know, instill this need for kids and this desire for them to want to go to the library and spend time, you know, reading books? I don't know, I know personally, for me, I give all of my nieces and nephews books during holidays, and they know they're going to get books from Auntie Shadra, and they're happy about that. You know, I set up subscriptions with Zubeen so that they get books every month, and they know they're expecting that, and they're excited when it comes. So I think that we're thinking about it, and people are trying, and they're setting up programs, and, you know, First Book, for example, is doing their part to provide students of need, kids in need with books, and teachers of need with books. So people are doing the work, but I think it's going to take some time. I don't know. I mean, is that naive? What do you think? I don't know.
Well, my experience is that I didn't think about any of that, and I agree with you. My parents read a lot, and I always read. I always read my sister's books. She was older than me, and I was reading, for instance, my favorite story as a child, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, when I was in second grade. She was in sixth grade. I didn't read my books, I read hers. So, scared the daylights out of me. I didn't know half the words there, what they meant, but it's my favorite story. It became my story. So I never even thought about that. Norman Rockwell, which was one of the artists I knew, as Steve Ditko, Spider-Man. He used to draw Spider-Man. I didn't think of these men as white or black at that time because I just enjoyed the stories and the pictures and the illustrations. So I think if a child learns to really enjoy reading or stories, they'll still be attracted to it. And then diversity is, I think it's starting to happen, actually.
And there are many, you know,
so now they're relating to that.
As Chris said, there's many kinds of diversity. And I think hopefully, you know, this is a great panel in which to talk about race. I think it is important. I mean, just one last thing on that is I recall that I didn't know that I needed books about people of color when I was young. But in fourth grade, I remember wanting to be white. Because people were calling me names. I didn't see myself represented. I didn't think about it at the time. It wasn't until later that I realized that, you know, I had some psychological things I needed to work on because everything that was black or about people who looked like me was negative, right? It wasn't framed properly for me. I want to, you know, not to switch to, we can spend more time on that. I think we're about out of time. We have about 5 minutes. But I'd like to, each of you to comment, if you would, on your writing process, and maybe like 1 minute each. I know that's as hard as it is to capture. We have 45 minutes. I think we've tackled a lot of different issues. But if you could, maybe let's narrow the field a little bit. How do you start? How do you begin your process for each of your works?
Writing or illustration?
Or illustration. I know some of you do both, or one of the others.
Chris, you can start.
Forget you, Shadra. No. Shadra, yeah, Shadra's my people. In terms of my own process, it's really about the idea first and finding the basket to hold that idea. I write and I illustrate in a lot of different styles. And it's really about, you know, where you find an idea and find something you care about, be it a dancer that you think is really important, or your own desire to talk about the importance of pens in your life. And then you move from there to find what is the framework that can hold that idea. That book really quickly started in a juvenile detention center. And I talked to a lot of young men, and they kept asking me, what kind of watch did I wear? Did I live in a mansion? Did I drive a fancy car? And I realized I translated what they were saying to what kind of power do you have? There's these young men who are in prison, and they are the most powerless people I've ever met in certain ways. And I told them I'm ridiculous with a pen. And I said to them, you know, everything around you, from the architecture to the mic stand to this bottle, is all designed. Somebody drew it, somebody wrote it, somebody made it happen through their pen. And that's where that came from. So,
Thank you.
So I write as well, and I'll be working on my first authored book after I finish the one that I'm working on now. Every story happens differently. I think for me, it's really coming up with a catchy idea. I usually am responding to something else that I've seen in the world, a commercial, a friend's sonogram, something that happened in my family, and then it's figuring out what I want to give in that story, figuring out the heart of it. And even with illustration, it's really thinking about the heart of the story and how best to connect with the reader, I guess. Yeah.
Nice.
I actually think I do the opposite of Chris. Probably I think about some characters that I want to draw in a setting, and then I kind of think about as, you know, like what do I want to incorporate into the story, and then how can I make a story that connects all those things. And I think they're kind of somehow connected. The story is somehow connected to what's happening in my life.
So specific characters to a story, sort of fleshing it out to a story.
Yeah, like connecting the dots.
In my case, I'm an editorial artist, also illustrator, so I did a lot of work for magazines and stuff, and also corporations and things like that. So you have to think of two concepts sometimes and put them together, which were opposites. In the case of draw, for instance, okay, I wanted to write something about my childhood when I used to draw. Well, I used to draw a lot of Spider-Man comic books, or I used to draw from Norman Rockwell. That's the first illustrator I ever knew about. But I went to this exhibit years, now as an adult, and where these photographs were about animals, and there was these huge photographs hanging in the exhibit, and they were beautiful. Rhinos and giraffes and some of them had a child interacting with the animals. And what I did is I said, well, I'll write the story about the child who likes to draw, but I'm going to incorporate animals into it. Actually, this little boy is going to go on a safari. He's not going to hunt them down. He's going to draw them. And that's how the idea came about. You put two concepts, totally opposites maybe, together, create something new.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists.
And you were talking about the passage where he said all the people of import from Jesus to whomever were white, and I needed to see myself. It was a fantastic book.
I want to do one thing, if I may. I know we're going to go over by 30 seconds, if that's all right. So this is a little, I think we're in a progressive atmosphere. I think folks will get down with this. And I also think you've been sitting for a little while. So I want to do something a little bit different here. And I'm going to ask everyone to stand for a moment. We're not going to dance, but we are going to sing. And this is a song that I hope everyone can connect with. You know the lyrics. If not, sort of mouth the lyrics. You're all looking here, so no one's looking at you. And the song is, I'm going to start off, and I hope that everyone will join in a moment. I just want to make sure I remember all the lyrics. So, you ready? Can we get a beat? Anyone here rhythmically inclined? Okay. So here we go. Just kick in the beat when we start, okay? So here we go. Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in our book, a reading rainbow. I can go anywhere, friends to know and ways to grow, a reading rainbow.